Welcome back, everyone, to speakers and panelists and people who have joined us on the live stream. Welcome to the people who are just joining us now for the first time or for the first time today. It's wonderful to have you here. This is the Conference on Sustainable Artificial Intelligence. My name is Aimee van Wynsberghe. I am the Alexander von Humboldt Professor for the Applied Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. Now, we have a little bit of a technical issue that we're trying to get Mark on the Zoom call, and we're having a little bit of difficulty doing that, so we will be slightly delayed, and I wanted to let you know that that was happening. And so we can do one of two things. I see that there's quite a few of you on the live stream, and also quite a few of you on the speaker's Zoom call. So if you would like, you're welcome to ask me any questions that you might have. If there's something that you meant to ask along the way, or you're just thinking of something now, please feel free to ask me. Otherwise, we will pause for a minute and hopefully try and get Mark onto the call, and then we will resume the session. So I'll give it maybe 30 seconds to a minute and sit here and wait and see if anyone has questions. Please feel free to ask away. And then if nothing, then we will turn our screens off and wait until we can get Mark online. I need some music. Do 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 do. Any Mark on the Zoom call? Yes, we have Mark.
Hello, everyone. Yes. Hello.
Wonderful. Hi, Mark. It's so nice to see you.
Hi, Aimee. It's been a while.
I know. I guess I should say to the audience, Mark and I go way back. We were at the University of Twente together back in 2008.
Right.
So long ago.
Definitely. Yeah, 13 years, that is.
I know. My goodness, time is
Yes.
flying. So it's really nice that, and our paths keep crossing. We were both on the high-level expert group together, and we show up at conferences all the time. So it's really nice that we get to have this conversation. Yeah.
Yes, we're part of this community of people in ethics of AI and ethics of robotics.
Yeah, really nice. So I will do just a brief introduction of you, Mark, before we jump into talking about your latest book. And I'll introduce you just for the people who are joining us that may not know all of the amazing things about you. And I also can't go through your whole CV or bio because it's quite impressive. You're on quite a few advisory boards and have written so many books. It's really wonderful. So to everyone who is joining us, this is Professor Dr. Mark Coeckelbergh. He is Professor of Media and Technology at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Vienna. He is on a variety of different editorial advisory boards. He is on the board of AI and Ethics, of Science and Engineering Ethics, of TechNE, and on. So there's quite a list there. He is a member of the European Commission High-Level Expert Group on Artificial Intelligence. He is also on the Austrian Council on Robotics and AI. So this just goes to show that Mark has not only the academic credentials, but is also has one foot in the policy-making space, which is wonderful. He does so many different public speaking events and is the author of an incredible number of books. Some of the earlier ones, Liberation and Passion, and then moving on, Growing Moral Relations, New Romantic Cyborgs, and AI Ethics, which I have to say is a wonderful contribution to the space. It's really nice how you were able to translate some of the more difficult concepts and things that we're thinking about for a wider audience, so that more people could learn about the space. So that's great. So I will leave it at that. And please, if there's anything else that you want to add to your bio that I didn't mention, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I guess we should get right into it. And today we are talking about Professor Mark Coeckelbergh's newest book that's coming out. And I think at first we should probably hear from you, Mark, what is the book about? Yeah, and tell us the full name and the full title so that we get, we get a sense of what you've written about.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thank you for your kind introduction, and I congratulate you with your Humboldt professorship and with this great conference. I think it's a very good team at the right time. But yeah, let me say something about this book. So first of all, the title Green Leviathan, or the Poetics of Political Liberty. It's a disjunction. So basically, like you have to choose one of the two, and I go for the second. So just to make sure that people know where I stand. So it's not like in medieval times or early modern times when you had like these titles with a comma, or it's really a disjunction. So what is the book about? Okay. The book starts with a story of what I call Green Leviathan, and that's basically a scenario where the world is taken over by an AI, but an AI who rules us for our own benefit, for the benefit of humanity. So AI has decided that we are really pretty bad in managing the planet, that we messed up. And so it has basically installed a kind of totalitarian system where people are forced to be green. Another background of this, next to a historical one of thinking about totalitarianism, is also the movements that are there, that want change in a green and climate direction. For example, Extinction Rebellion, and there can be sometimes a society that gets us more into the direction of, okay, people should do this, and therefore we should have strict rules and so on. And so what I wanted to do in the book is think about that, and think, for example, also a third context is also how China dealt with the pandemic. It's very effective how it dealt with that. And so I wanted to show with the story, okay, there is a certain attraction to this kind of thinking, also traditionally in philosophy with Thomas Hobbes, who had this idea of the Leviathan that rules. So basically, you can really change things in an effective way. You can rule people and therefore achieve outcomes, and it could be green outcomes, could be good outcomes. But of course, we don't really want a totalitarian state, right? So then I looked at the concept of freedom and discussions about freedom in political philosophy, and the total opposite view of freedom is laissez-faire, just let people do what they want. But that, of course, the problem with that is that this has resulted in the situation I think that we are in today, that we have a planet with states pulling out of agreements like the US under the Trump regime. And so the problem with that is that we cannot really reach the climate goals. We cannot really reach other goals that have to do with human flourishing. And so in the book, I've tried to find a third way that's not about just preserving negative freedom, but a positive view of freedom, as I call it, where it's more about developing capabilities. Nussbaum, you know, also comes in there, and also a view of politics that's more open. So where the collective does not stop with humans. Where I say, like, look, this political questions is not just about us. This is also about the future of other species on this planet. And then finally, I get to a view that I say, like, okay, poetics in the sense not of poetry or something, but it's about making things and seeing that also as political, because ancient philosophy and also later the way it's dealt with by Hannah Arendt always thinks that politics has to be about citizens talking versus people doing household, people making things. And I think that kind of division and distinction is wrong. I think what we do in the household and also the making of things in the technological sphere is also political. Technology is also political in various ways. And in this way, I probably I try to get to a more a different view of freedom and a different view of politics, which I think is more able to tackle thinking about climate change than these two horns of the dilemma, either authoritarianism or laissez-faire. And that's the book in a very, very
In a
little
nutshell.
nutshell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So before I start with my follow-up questions, because I have quite a few, I also wanted to say to all of the people who are joining us on the Zoom call or on the live chat, please feel free to ask questions to Mark at any time. So normally there's a moment where you say, yeah, now you can ask your questions. Please feel free to type them into the boxes at any time, and I will weave them into the conversation. So no worries about waiting for a specific moment, okay? So first, my first question has to do with capabilities. You mentioned the capabilities approach as kind of, where you see us going. Can you tell us more about what capabilities we are talking about? Are you taking the Nussbaum list of capabilities, or are there different capabilities that you're drawing in?
I'm taking the Nussbaum list, but emphasize first of all emphasize the more environmental side. So the Nussbaum list already has some relational aspect in there, but it doesn't really fully express how much we as humans are dependent on our natural environment. So I stress that, and also by shifting the borders of a political to non-humans as well. I talk about the flourishing of non-humans too, or at least ask attention for that. Because I think the most accounts of both thinking about AI and thinking about climate change are very human-centered. It's always said that we need human-centered AI and so on, and that's meant human-centered as opposed to machines taking over. But what I mean is that human-centered is not good if it means that we only care about our flourishing. If only just to save us, we should care about others. And there could also be intrinsic reasons for caring for non-humans. So I think we have enough environmental philosophy already on that for a long time, but somehow that didn't really make it to thinking about AI and climate change, and I try to bring that in.
Okay. So I want to then maybe ask more explicitly about your view of how we should be valuing the environment, because this is also a debate in environmental philosophy. But in the book, do you start with the premise or the assumption that the environment is intrinsically valuable or instrumentally valuable, or are you really trying to push away from this anthropocentric, the environment is instrumentally valuable position?
I definitely push away from the instrumental position by involving some post-humanist thinking. So by showing that, look, post-humanists already, just as environmentalists, right, have questioned this anthropocentrism, and so I do adopt that in that specific chapter, and say, okay, so then the borders of the political have to be widened. And yeah, I don't really come down on one specific theory in this area. For me, people can come from different directions at this, as long as we understand that our freedom, because this particular book is about freedom, it's really something that we can only exercise and enjoy and develop in terms of capabilities and flourishing if we see ourselves as related to these other beings. So I think both environmental philosophy, thinking about Kimlicka, for example, who wrote about political rights for some animals, and post-humanists such as Haraway and Braidotti. I think they show us like, okay, there is this non-anthropocentric or post-anthropocentric thinking. So that definitely should be part of the mix, and it's currently not even considered. People care about, when it comes to freedom, care about their freedom, but what about freedom and flourishing of other species?
Right. So two branches. One is a question that I see coming up, and I will get to that one in just one second. But I wanted to ask, so you've said now a couple of times the flourishing of non-humans. And I'm also very familiar with your work in the robotics space. So I'm wondering, where's the boundary in the non-human discussion? Are we talking about animals and plants and trees and whatnot, or are you extending beyond that?
It's a good question. I think if we take a properties approach, as I call it, like if you look just at what properties that animals and machines have, then I would say a more ecological way of thinking should be restricted to living beings, and probably pragmatically speaking, this is probably the way to go in our politics of climate change. However, I do think that in the past decades, there has been more thinking in philosophy of technology, which I think complicates matters a bit and starts questioning also those distinctions, and I contributed to that. I didn't do that by arguing for robot rights, because some people think I'm for giving robots rights. I mean, that's not my argument. But I did point to certain ways we think about moral status that are quite alienating and doing potential violence to the thing or person or whatever it is, right? Because we put ourselves in this kind of hierarchical position and say like, okay, we humans are going to decide about the metaphysics of everything, in which category every being belongs, and so on. And I find that a very arrogant way of thinking, and one that I think we should totally abandon. It's a way of thinking, I think, that also is connected to colonial ways of thinking and to ways of thinking about other humans, about animals in the past, and that we should go beyond. So yeah, I mean, I at least think that question of open borders of the political should be asked. If you would press me on what kind of position are you going to defend, I would back the people who are in favor of animal rights, favor of protection of ecosystems. But I think the larger philosophical issue is that I think we should keep that border open, because otherwise we might, inadvertently close it and exclude entities that and do violence to them.
Yeah. Okay. I see. Good. Thank you. I'm always curious about that question.
Sure,
so
yeah.
I want to circle back onto the concept of freedom. And that's, I'm bringing in the question from one of our audience viewers right now. So freedom is a cornerstone in this book. And you mentioned positive freedom when you were talking about, again, where your aspirations are going. So how does positive freedom, or what does it look like? Can you delve into this?
Yeah, so what it looks like is that freedom to that the freedom to just be left alone and also the freedom to to have no one tell you what you really want. These two kinds of freedoms, which in the political sphere is called like negative freedom, and what Berlin calls, Isaiah Berlin calls positive freedom, as self-mastery. I think these kinds of freedoms we definitely should not underestimate their value. We should defend them, right? But I think there's also the freedom to live one's life according to some kind of ethical ideal, and the freedom to develop as the being you are, and to flourish in your environment with others, and this kind of thing. So that connects freedom with ethics and politics, rather than just seeing it as this kind of individual thing, leave me alone, or I want to be the master of my emotions, both of which have some importance and should be defended everywhere in the world, but are not enough. I think it's a kind of impoverished ideal of freedom if that's the only freedom we want to have. And so the book then explores this kind of freedom that is more relational and more social, and that also does away with the Hobbesian way of seeing the problem, because Hobbes thought that if you just leave people among themselves, they're gonna fight, basically make their life nasty. And I think that's a very pessimistic view of human beings, and one that leads to authoritarianism, because then there needs to be strong hand of the Leviathan with the sword, to keep people under control. I think it easily ends up into authoritarianism, and I think if we have like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a more positive view of how would the world be if we didn't have our political institutions, and see people as potentially able to have good relationships, to also see the other not just in terms of competition but cooperate and so on, then I think we on that basis we can have a positive view of freedom, and think about what kind of institutions are then necessary, that not institutions to control people, but institutions that facilitate that kind of cooperation, and that facilitate like working towards the good life and a good society. So it's trying to change that kind of frame of thinking in political philosophy, and I think that will help us also in thinking about technology, thinking about environment and climate change.
So I have a follow-up question then to that one. The person is asking, does this freedom to be left alone apply to human beings only? And why or why not? So I guess going back to where you're drawing the line, how far does this freedom go?
I think it's the freedom of being left alone is often in the human case interpreted as privacy, and privacy is a concept that developed in a certain liberal bourgeois kind of society, and has a very specific meaning, and is just tied to humans. But I do think that the freedom to be left alone in the sense of non-interference doesn't apply to animals if it means that we don't harm them, that if we're talking about wild animals, that we don't generally as a kind of prima facie rule not interfere with their lives. I think that makes sense to me. Of course, we would have to further discuss, and just like in the human case, there could be reasons and principles that in a certain situation overrule this basic prima facie kind of principle, leave animals alone. It could be that for example, I want to help an animal, medically speaking, right? Then I could interfere for that reason. So this is definitely, I mean, I think we should definitely consider this kind of negative rights also for animals, for sure. And with animals, it's also always a question then, of course, which animals, right? Because we have our pets, we have wild animals. So such a discussion then has to differentiate between this kind of different relations we have with different kinds of animals, between the kinds of animals also, because flourishing for a cat that lives in a house is different for flourishing of a wild tiger or something. So I think we need to discuss this in more detail, but I would definitely open the door to that kind of discussions.
Okay. So I think I see a lot of questions coming up about sustainability. So what I'd like to do is kind of, make an explicit kind of turn to that topic, and maybe also to give you some context. In the last 2 days, right, we've been talking about, there's quite a few researchers interested in this topic of sustainable AI, and now we're in the process of defining it. What does it mean? What does it look like? Is it different from AI ethics? Or is it just adding another value onto the trustworthy guidelines kind of thing? So we're in that process of trying to make sense and trying to find the gaps and the areas where we should be exploring. So when I was reading your book, and also even just the very idea of your book, you are addressing AI and climate change. And I wonder if you can say something. You wrote the paper AI for Climate. And I'm wondering if you could say something, to help us also make this step. How does your book fit into a sustainable AI dialogue? And maybe from your perspective, what do you see sustainable AI as being? Is it AI for achieving sustainability, or is it something else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many of I see many ways that AI can positively contribute to dealing with climate change, and many of these reasons are also applicable to sustainability, which could be seen as a sort of wider concept, and also a concept that's maybe closer to people thinking about economy and how to do things practically. I mean, AI can obviously it can help us to use less energy, for example, like smart systems. That's good for climate, but also for building more sustainable society and economy. We can also use AI to monitor the consequences of our technological and other actions on the environment. This helps for climate change. It doesn't directly have a link to changing human behavior, but it makes us more aware of what we already do. So I think that the analysis of big data can really help with that. So there are many ways I think that AI can help both dealing in a better way with climate and sustainability, but there's a long way to go. As you know, in the high-level expert group, we started from these principles, and then would move slowly to something more concrete. And I was in this group working on the societal and environmental aspects, and I took the lead there to really make sure that this is also at least flagged. Because people were pushing back on regulation there from industry, but at least I think it's on the table now, and more people are aware of it. I think there's still a lot of work to do with technical people to make them aware that what they're doing relates to electricity, which is produced potentially in a non-sustainable way and in a non-climate friendly way. So I think there we can take really practical steps. Now, with regard to my book, then I would say that there's also a problem with AI and sustainability, in the sense that I can see how AI can be used to nudge people into better behavior. Because if we analyze people, we can make recommendations and we can steer their behavior. But in the book, I also questioned this because nudging is it's called libertarian paternalism, and it's definitely paternalistic because we say like we already have a goal and now we're going to influence your behavior. And the influencing is done in a subconscious way. So basically, I argue that that the autonomy of people is not respected by this. We are people that can reason, that can argue about things, and when you're doing the subconscious manipulation, even if it would lead to lives that lead to a more sustainable society, economy, environment, I think it's politically problematic to do that, and ethically, because of this threat to human autonomy. So that's one way of how I show like, okay, it can do a lot of good, but we need to look at this political problem regarding freedom.
Right. So actually, picking up on this, I have one of the questions on the screen here. So the question concerns the balance that you mentioned between authoritarianism and laissez-faire. You are critical of
Yeah.
climate nudging, a tool of the Green Leviathan, because it threatens to undermine people's autonomy and freedom. But wouldn't it be possible to differentiate between nudging regarding food choices, like in the supermarket, and climate choices, like air travel? Because with bad food choices, you primarily harm yourself, but with bad climate choices, unnecessary air travel, you harm others.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I disagree with that distinction. I think food seems something that only is about ourselves and what we do. But in fact, our food choices have consequences for the way food is produced, and that has climate consequences. For example, eating meat, it's known that this produces bad consequences for the climate, for the development of climate as we see it. And so I think it's in both cases one could use nudging to make people do different things. So the two actually come together. We could in supermarkets, for example, we could nudge people into buying less meat, and in that way contribute to climate change,
Mm.
to dealing with climate change.
Yeah, no, I see. Okay, so circling back again, going back to freedom, I have quite a few questions on freedom as the core principle here. So one person is asking, in how far is limiting AI research, AI and AI research through sustainability requirements a justifiable infringement of freedom? So I guess we're talking about the infringement of academics or developers, people who are researching and making it. And if we have requirements that they have to meet sustainability criteria, is that an infringement on their freedom?
Yeah, very good question. So I think as a society we will have to decide about that. I would like to point out about that we already have a lot of restrictions on all kind of research and development activities, both in the public and the private sector. We already have ethical rules for medical research, for example, and we don't think that this is too much of an infringement of the freedom of research, or at least we justify the infringement by saying, like, look, there are other things. There's the animalytics, for example, right? So I think we have to balance this. We have to look what kind of limitations to freedom of research are allowed, and usually we give a little bit more leeway to people in academic research, but in both cases there are other values and interests too. So it's always going to be this balance that we have to find and what we find most important. However, I think when it comes to climate change, if it's really true that that we are in a crisis, that we really have to do something, and otherwise things get seriously worse for the planet. I think if that's true, then we have to act, and one could say then it is justified to have this restriction. So I think the argument will be easier to make maybe in the case of climate change. For sustainability, I think it's more difficult to make. But there too, probably it helps if you show people like, look, if we don't live sustainable, then these and these are the consequences on the long term. But one has to do probably more effort to show these consequences. I think if we just tell people you have to do this or that, it's not going to be enough. I think there needs to be a good argument and one that takes people seriously as reasoners. So not always manipulate them. Just say like, look, we have this problem, and this is going to happen if we do so and so. I still believe that this is should be the main way of addressing people, and not just restricting their freedom.
So then I have a question of my own, related to this idea when you're talking about the situation that we're in with climate change and the impact and the conversations that are happening. I'm curious about the motivation for writing the book, because you've already done an AI ethics book where you're talking about the more canonical ethical issues. You're very well published in the robot ethics space, where you have introduced this relational turn, in this space, as you mentioned before, opening up the boundaries, not arguing for robot rights, but opening up this boundary to consider the other. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, why this topic over maybe racial biases or the black box or what is it about this topic that really you said, no, I have to sit down and do this?
Yeah. I think there are two things that motivated me. One was to bring more political philosophy to the discussion. So before I did philosophy, I studied political science, and I started off being interested in political philosophy and ethics. I definitely think that there's much to learn from political philosophy for thinking about technologies, for thinking about environment. So that was one motivation. It's like sort of being channeling that to these other academic fields or subfields. And the reason why I looked at freedom was that I found that the discussion in AI ethics is very, very focused on justice and bias, and I do think this is a very important topic, and especially in certain contexts where there are obvious, huge problems with racism in society, and to some extent, all Western societies have that. But for example, many people writing AI ethics are writing in a North American political context, and it's clear to me that it's politically very necessary to do that. Academically also, and technically we have to figure out how to translate that. But I felt that maybe freedom in the West, if I can say it, is too much taken for granted. Something we don't need to talk about anymore. And I don't think that we should take it for granted. And the current pandemic actually shows how easy it is for governments, once they find a cause we should all be behind, to curb freedoms. And I'm not I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not someone who is against the measures that are taken by many governments. One can be critical of particular measures. One should be. We should have public discussion. But in general, I think it's good. But what I see is that it was relatively easy to turn a free liberal democracy into something else, something that makes me feel a bit strange when I go jogging on the street and there's a police car, in the strict lockdown, or that makes my daughter ask me, like, why is this police car following us or something like that. So it's quite easy, I think, to get from democracy to totalitarianism and authoritarianism, and so we should definitely be aware of the dangers there. And for me, it was kind of intellectually interesting to start with sketching almost the attractions of the authoritarian solution, say like what China did with pandemic, it was very effective. Green Leviathan, but then say like, hey, wait a minute, what is then the alternative? So we want freedom, but what kind of freedom do we want? And do we think enough about freedom and technology? And so I hope with this book to contribute to more thinking about that. But in the longer run, I also look at the other issues, and it's my aim to develop a more, at least to help, bringing kind of more political philosophy of technology, really, in that this happens. And so I also look at issues concerning democracy, for example. So for me, it's not just about freedom. I'm not married to that term and to that discussion. But I thought, like, okay, I want to say something, about freedom and technology now in this time, when I think that this is also it's a good thing to do it now.
So I wonder then if I can follow up on this stream of thought. You had mentioned earlier when you were talking about the book and sort of giving us a description, you said technology is political. And so, of course, for me, Langdon Winner is the first kind of concept that comes to mind. I wonder, and now you're talking about, you wrote this because you wanted to discuss democracy and freedom. And so, can you put this together? Can you weave this together? This technology is political, and AI and climate change. And, are you suggesting that we create AI to help us achieve democracy, or just throwing it out there? But can you weave these together?
Yeah, this I'm writing about it, and it's a very complex network of different terms here, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to think this together. That's not good English, but it makes sense in other Germanic languages. So you try to conceptually bring things together. So for me, with democracy, there's also all kind of issues there, but it's definitely the case that so far we don't have much democratic discussion about technologies. It used to be with nuclear technologies that governments decide, and that and it is the case that big tech companies decide about most of the technology we use, digital technology we use in our lives. But it also means that if we want to change our lives into a more sustainable, green direction, climate friendly, and so on, that we don't really, we have a say about some things, like we can try to grow our own food, for example, right? But I cannot decide, what this phone is going to be. But what this phone is going to be also has an impact on the environment and on sustainability and so on. So I think it's really important there that we move to a more democratic way of deciding about technology, exactly because the technology is political, and because we want change. So I think it's wrong to portray environmental change as just a matter of changing your individual attitudes and individual lives. Now I think we need to change the whole political and societal structure and institutions that make it the case that this phone is now what it is.
Yeah. For me, I find that one of the most sort of frustrating parts of the conversation, the monopolization of the big tech companies. When you said you don't have a choice in the phone, and how did we get to this point? That we don't have a choice between. I mean, there is the Fairphone, but
Yeah,
there should be a whole variety of sustainable or climate friendly phones, right? And I hope that we get there someday. But I also know there's so many things at play. But I find it very frustrating that our options are bad and worse
yeah,
with these
yeah.
technologies.
It is frustrating, and I think there are two ways to do something about it. I think it shows that the counting on the market in the sense of the demand side only is not enough, right? Or just put it in economic terms. So something needs to be done at the supply side. So companies really need to throw all their weight, their power into this, I think. And from being European, you can expect that I also say like, well, we should also regulate, right? Regulate the
Yeah.
supplier side and push them to develop more, to put much more of the. I mean, there's so many smart people. There's so much creativity, and these companies are having this power. So if we can regulate in such a way that we keep the innovation and creativity, but that really pushes them further into the environmental direction, I think this this is the way to go, because just counting on individuals changing behavior, becoming aware that this is a problem, is not enough, unfortunately. I mean, and it is
Yeah.
frustrating. I mean, for people who follow this already for decades, as I do, the green movement has been around, politically, and also civil society has been around for so long,
Yeah.
um, since at least the 70s, and we are still driving our cars and doing the things we do. So I think it's there needs to be on the from the side of making the technology and technology policy, there needs to be a big shift.
Yeah. Sorry, to my tech, can you just scroll down a bit? I want to ask the question that is at the top of the screen right now. Can you go down? Yeah, I think that's perfect. Okay. So I have still so many questions. I'm so sorry to the people in the audience if I'm not getting to your question, but I'm trying. It's just there's so many things to talk about. Okay, so regarding your view on policy making, do you think climate change is a problem that's similar to other societal problems, like, for example, crime? Or do you think it is inherently different and therefore should be tackled differently?
I think
Uh,
there are differences in the sense of it's climate change is by definition a global phenomenon, and we talked already a bit about that. It has to do with not only with human beings, because crime. I mean, it's an interesting question, because even just asking the question makes us already think like, yeah, but crime, why should that only be about human beings, right? So we have so many concepts and institutions that are human-centered. And I think this is part of the problem. We built a modern world around that human, and a particular human maybe as well, keeping in mind discussions about colonization and so on. So I think we need to get away from this, and thinking about climate sustainability and so on can help us to move more into that direction, and reflect back on the usual problems and the way we usually frame them.
okay.
So yeah, these are just some thoughts, really.
Yeah, yeah. So the next question, do you think there is a difference in terms of risks for our freedom between governments taking extraordinary measures that infringe our freedom to survive in a crisis and corporations developing disruptive technology that take possession of citizens' rights to the future tense for profit.
Yeah, so I think both sides can go to the authoritarian side of the dilemma, right? So the governments may decide to implement certain measures, so that can go to taking away our freedom. But we should not forget, and that's sometimes the problem I have with North American discussions or Anglophone discussions, that we should not forget that companies can also take away our freedom. They themselves are, when they are left free, they do their thing, and they will also try to develop things in a certain direction. But I think there's always a danger that that through consumerism and through the socioeconomic system that we have, that that there's also taking away of our freedom. Maybe not the freedom to do what we want, but the freedom that we develop our flourishing in an ethical way, also the freedom to that respects ourselves as these autonomous reasoners. So I think there's a lot of possibilities now for manipulation of people, and together with the science of psychology, cognitive science, and so on. Although these people do not intend it in a bad way, I mean, all this contributes to a system in which we as consumers, as citizens, are increasingly being manipulated, both by private and public sector. And this is a problem we should remain aware of, because the temptation, and that's the book about it, the temptation is really big to do so, especially faced with the problems.
So then I guess this next question follows up nicely when we're talking about who to be wary of and whatnot, and what can we do about it. The question asks, do you think that we as individuals can make a difference, or do we have to rely on policymakers?
Yeah, so that relates a bit back to what we discussed before. I think the individuals have definitely a role in this, but individuals making a change, it's usually only quite a small part of society. And so policymakers have a huge role and responsibility in this. And there used to be this concept in the past of statesmanship, which is a sexist concept. We can change it to statespersonship. But the good side of that concept was that you have in politics some people who think about the long term. And I think all these kind of questions around environmental issues, sustainability, climate change, they all concern the long term, but the long term we should take action for now. And I think there should be more leadership in the area of policy making in this, that really pushes for more sustainable ways of doing, more climate friendly ways of doing, and keeping of course a balance with democratic participation. But I think policymakers have this unique power next to big companies to make a change. So we definitely should expect that from them, and also translate that in the way we hold them accountable and express our expectations to them.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, I'm fidgeting over here. I'm trying to get closer to the fan because it's so hot over here.
Yeah, I have
don't
one
mean.
behind me too. That's why my hair is like.
Yeah. So just one last thing, because people are asking, but when is your book available? When can people buy it off the shelves? Can you tell us some more about the availability?
Yeah. So the good news is that the book is available already since end of May, so people can get it on the publisher's website. People can get it on Amazon. And and I should also say, like, if you're interested in political philosophy of AI, there will be more to come.
Great.
I'm happy that I could talk about my book today.
Yeah, really, I can't thank you enough, Mark. It was really great to for you to give us the opportunity to talk about it in more detail. And I know that we are the first ones to have the kind of sneak peek and the author discussion. So I really appreciate that. Thank you to everyone who is joining us on the live stream and on the Zoom link. We've had a ton of people and a ton of questions. I didn't get to get through them all, but thank you for participating. Yeah, what to say? I look forward to continuing this conversation at another time, hopefully in person, with perhaps a beer in our hand.
Yes, I also look forward to that. I think we academics all miss that, and we need it. We need the personal conversations, also as philosophers, like in ancient times. And thank you again for inviting me, and being able to engage with this audience. Also, I think it's very interesting also to continue the conversation.
Great, thank you. Okay, so to the rest of the speakers and the registered participants who are watching us on the live stream, thank you very much for being here. I'm not sure if it's as hot where you are, but it's really hot over here, so I appreciate you being with us. And yep, my brain is starting to go now. One last reminder, well, two, I guess, reminders. Tomorrow we have another full day of activities planned for you. We have more paper sessions from really exciting authors. I'm so excited to listen to Federica Lucivero speak about environmental costs of sort of digitization, big data, and AI. We have Pak Heng Wang, who's going to speak about Confucian perspectives and to relate this to AI. We have a panel co-organized by the World Economic Forum where we are getting deeper into intergenerational issues. And we also have the presentation with myself and Thijs Biersteker, where we will be talking about the art installation that we are creating. As another announcement, my last announcement for today, there is a special issue that we are working on. And so this is the Journal of Sustainability. We are going to do a special issue, which will also turn into an edited volume, the title of which is called Towards the Sustainability of AI, Multidisciplinary Approaches to Investigate the Hidden Costs of AI. So everyone who has been speaking at the conference, you are warmly welcome and invited to submit something to this journal. Everyone who is joining us on the live stream and who's also working on these topics or working on a paper, please, you are also welcome to submit. This is meant to be multidisciplinary. The deadline is September 1st, but we will have a kind of rolling online publication. So that's it for me. That's it for today. Enjoy your evening, and I look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. No, at 9:45. Yes, thank you. Okay, we'll see you later. Bye.